While shopping at Walmart, a veteran noticed a little girl in the kids section eagerly picking out a toy with what seemed to be her father. But when he saw them again outside, heading toward the parking lot, the girl looked back and waved at him. In that moment, he noticed something shocking and knew he had to take action fast. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like these stories, don't forget to subscribe. The summer sun beat down relentlessly on the sprawling parking lot of the Walmart Supercenter on San Bernardino Avenue in Laredo, Texas. Rick Dawson, a retired military officer in his late 60s, guided his car into an empty spot, the engine humming softly as he kept it running. Despite his age, Rick's movements were still fluid and purposeful, a testament to his years of military discipline and training. As Rick turned off the engine, he glanced at the passenger seat where his wife, Margaret, sat. Unlike Rick, whose body seemed to defy the ravages of time, Margaret's face was etched with lines of discomfort. Her hands, once nimble and strong, now rested uneasily in her lap, fingers slightly swollen from the rheumatoid arthritis that had become her constant companion. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Rick asked, his voice a gentle rumble that carried notes of concern and affection in equal measure. Margaret attempted a smile, but it was clear the effort cost her. "Oh, you know how it is, Rick. These joints of mine aren't too happy today. The drive didn't help much either." Rick nodded, understanding written across his features. He'd watched helplessly over the years as the arthritis slowly robbed Margaret of her mobility, transforming simple tasks into daily challenges. It pained him to see her struggle, but he admired her resilience, the way she faced each day with quiet determination. "Well, we're here now. Hold on, sweetheart," he said, patting her hand gently, a soothing balm to Margaret's discomfort. "I'll go in and get your medicine from the pharmacy. Is there anything else we need?" Margaret's brow furrowed in concentration as she mentally reviewed their needs. "Yes, dear. Remember, I need 2 medicines, the methotrexate for my arthritis and the folic acid. Oh, and here's the prescription for the folic acid." She opened her purse, her movements slow and deliberate as she fished out a folded piece of paper. Rick took the prescription, carefully tucking it into the breast pocket of his button-down shirt. "Got it. I'll pick up some groceries while I'm at it. You just rest here, okay? I won't be long." As he opened the car door, the wave of heat that rushed in was almost palpable. Rick paused, one foot on the scorching pavement, and turned back to Margaret. "Lock the doors, dear. I know we're in a busy parking lot, but you can never be too careful." Margaret nodded, familiar with Rick's cautious nature. It was a habit ingrained from years of military service, a constant vigilance that never quite left him, even in the most mundane of settings. She watched as he closed the door and made his way towards the entrance of Walmart, his posture straight and purposeful, despite the oppressive heat. As he entered the cool interior of the store, he noticed it was quiet for a Friday afternoon, with only the faint hum of distant chatter and the occasional squeak of a shopping cart wheel. Families with young children, elderly couples, and solitary shoppers moved through the aisles, each focused on their own errands and needs. It was a slice of everyday American life, a far cry from the regimented world Rick had known in the military. He grabbed a shopping cart, its metal cool against his palms, and began to make his way toward the pharmacy section. As he navigated through the store, Rick's mind wandered to the list of items they needed at home. The mundane necessities of civilian life sometimes still felt foreign to him, even after all these years. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion in the children's toy section. A young girl with blonde hair, wearing a cute Hello Kitty shirt, stood near a shelf clutching a figurine toy. Beside her, a man was crouching down, his face a mask of frustration. Rick slowed his pace, observing the scene with interest. The girl's face was scrunched up in disappointment, her small hands gripping the toy tightly. The man, who Rick assumed was her father, was speaking in low, urgent tones, clearly trying to convince the child to leave without the toy. The scene stirred something in Rick's heart, reminding him of similar moments with his own grandchildren. Without really thinking about it, he found himself approaching the pair, a gentle smile on his face. "Sweet daughter you've got there," he said to the man, his voice warm and friendly. "How old is she?" The man's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing with unexpected hostility. "Mind your own business, old man," he scowled, his voice laced with venom. Taken aback by the harsh response, Rick raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude, I just thought—" "Well, you thought wrong," the man interrupted, his voice rising. "Just keep moving and leave us alone." Rick nodded, backing away slowly. As he turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. The world seemed to have grown colder, less friendly. He remembered a time when a simple exchange between strangers didn't immediately spark suspicion and anger. As he walked away, he heard snippets of the man's conversation with the girl. "Let's go, come with me. We need to go. Don't you want to see your new home?" At the mention of a new home, Rick couldn't help but glance over his shoulder. He saw the man taking the figurine from the girl's hands, placing it back on the shelf before picking her up. The girl squirmed in his arms, clearly unhappy about leaving without the toy. Something about the interaction nagged at Rick. The man looked very much different from the girl, his features suggesting he might be of Hispanic origin. And there was something off about the way he said, "new home," a note of urgency that seemed out of place for a simple shopping trip. As Rick made his way to the pharmacy, a growing sense of unease settled in his gut. But what could he do? He had no concrete reason to suspect anything, just an instinct he couldn't shake. Shaking his head, Rick tried to focus on the task at hand. He had medicines to pick up and groceries to buy. Margaret was waiting for him in the car, in pain and counting on him. Yet, as he approached the pharmacy counter, the image of the little girl's face, a mixture of disappointment, lingered in his mind. The pharmacy section of Walmart was a stark contrast to the colorful chaos of the toy aisles. Here, the atmosphere was subdued, with muted conversations and the soft beeping of electronic devices. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, a reminder of the serious nature of this part of the store. Rick approached the counter, his footsteps echoing slightly on the polished floor. The pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair tucked neatly under a cap, looked up and smiled. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone used to dealing with people in various states of health and distress. Rick cleared his throat. "Good afternoon. I need to pick up 2 prescriptions, please. Methotrexate and folic acid." He fished out the prescription from his pocket, the paper slightly crumpled from its brief stay there. The pharmacist nodded, taking the prescription and examining it carefully. "Of course. Just give me a moment to process this for you." As Rick waited, the quiet of the pharmacy, punctuated only by the soft beeping of machines and the low murmur of voices, allowed his thoughts to circle back to the little girl and the man who claimed to be her father. Something about their interaction still didn't sit right with him. The pharmacist returned with 2 small bags. "Here you are, sir. The methotrexate and the folic acid. Would you like me to go over the dosage instructions?" Rick shook his head, offering a small smile. "No, thank you. We're familiar with these medications. My wife's been taking them for a while now." After paying for the prescriptions, Rick tucked the bags safely into his jacket pocket. He turned his cart around, ready to head to the grocery section. As he passed the toy section again, Rick found himself slowing down. The aisle was empty now, the girl and the man long gone. But something compelled him to turn down the aisle. He found himself standing in front of the shelf where he had seen the little girl earlier. There, among a sea of brightly colored toys, was the figurine the girl had been holding. Rick picked it up, examining it closely. It was a beautifully crafted piece, a character from a popular children's show. He noticed that it had a small hook on the back, perfect for hanging on a backpack. Rick checked the price tag and let out a low whistle. It wasn't cheap, priced at $24.99. But as he turned the package over, he noticed a bright yellow sticker announcing a 20% discount on this particular line of toys. He stood there for a moment, the figurine in his hand, lost in thought. The image of the little girl's disappointed face flashed through his mind again. Before he knew what he was doing, Rick had placed the figurine in his cart. He recognized it as a silly impulse. The chances of running into the girl again were almost non-existent. Yet, this small act of kindness, even if it went unnoticed, felt like a way to restore some balance and brighten the girl's day. He hoped they might still be around, and that he'd get the chance to meet them, while also wishing the man wouldn't be too rude to accept his gesture. As he pushed his cart towards the grocery section, Rick's phone began to ring. The sudden noise and vibration in his pocket made him jump slightly. He fished the device out, seeing Margaret's name on the screen. A pang of guilt hit him as he realized how long he'd been inside the store. "Hello, dear," he answered, a note of concern in his voice. "Rick, where are you?" Margaret's voice was strained, the pain evident even through the phone. "My joints are killing me. Did you get the medicine?" Guilt washed over Rick. He had let himself get distracted, forgetting for a moment why he was here in the first place. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. Yes, I have your medicine. Something happened and I got sidetracked, but I'm on my way now. Do you want me to bring it out to you now and then come back in for the groceries?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, please," Margaret finally said. "I hate to be a bother, but—" "You're never a bother," Rick assured her quickly. "I'll be right there." As he ended the call, Rick looked down at his cart. The figurine sat there, a silent reminder of the strange encounter that had thrown him off course. He knew he should just leave it and head straight to the car. Perhaps come back to it later, but something made him hesitate. He glanced towards the checkout lanes. They were mostly empty, it being a quiet Friday afternoon. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted them. The man and the little girl at one of the counters, paying for what looked like snacks and beverages. At that moment, Rick made a decision. He quickly pushed his cart to the nearest empty lane, determined to purchase the figurine before he lost sight of them again. As he approached the checkout, he recognized the cashier, Laura, a friendly middle-aged woman who had been working at the store for years. They'd known each other for a long time, often exchanging brief pleasantries when Rick stopped by during his weekly errands. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dawson," she said, her voice warm but laced with a touch of curiosity as she eyed the single item in his cart. "Just the one thing today. How's Margaret doing? Still managing all right?" Rick nodded, his eyes darting towards the other lane where the man and the girl were finishing up their transaction. "Yes, just this. But I bought her medicine at the pharmacy and paid there. I'll just drop it off at the car, then I'll be right back." He paused for a moment, then gestured discreetly towards the blonde child. "Say, Laura, have you seen that little girl before?" Laura followed his gaze, then shook her head. "Can't say that I have, Mr. Dawson. I've been stuck behind this counter since this morning, so I haven't had much chance to notice who's coming and going. Is everything all right?" Rick hesitated, unsure how to explain his unease. "It's probably nothing," he said finally, "just an old man's imagination running wild." Laura smiled kindly as she scanned the figurine. "Well, your imagination has good taste. This is a lovely toy. It's part of our older collection, which is why it's on sale. 15% off today." Rick nodded absently, his attention still focused on the man and the girl. They were leaving now, the man moving at a brisk pace that had the little girl almost jogging to keep up. "That'll be $19.99, Mr. Dawson," Laura's voice broke through his concentration. Rick quickly paid, thanking Laura, as he placed the figurine in his shopping cart. In his haste to follow the pair, he absent-mindedly pushed his cart with him, forgetting to drop it off. As he exited the store, the Texas heat hit him once again, but he barely noticed. His focus was on the parking lot, his eyes scanning the area until he spotted the man and the girl heading towards a car parked near the edge. Rick called out, "Excuse me!" But his voice was lost in the noise of the busy parking lot. He quickened his pace, calling out again, louder this time. This time the little girl heard him. She turned, her face lighting up with a smile as she recognized him. She waved at Rick, causing the man to stop and turn as well. Rick waved back at the girl and approached them. He took the figurine from the shopping cart and held it in his hand. "I'm sorry to bother you again," he said, addressing the man but smiling at the girl. I saw how much she liked this toy and I thought—" He held out the figurine. The man's face darkened, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Rick to the toy and back again. The little girl, however, was beaming, her eyes wide with excitement. "Can I have it?" she asked, looking up at the man. "Please?" The man didn't answer her. Instead, he fixed Rick with a cold stare. "I thought I told you to mind your own business, old man. What are you, some kind of stalker? Following us out here, trying to lure my daughter with toys?" Rick felt a chill run down his spine, despite the heat. No, nothing like that," he said quickly. "I'm a grandfather myself, you see. She just reminded me of my granddaughter, and I thought—" "Well, you thought wrong again," the man snapped, cutting him off. "This is your last warning. Keep the damn toy and give it to your own grandkid. Come on," he added to the girl, grabbing her arm and pulling her away. Rick stood there, the figurine still in his hand, watching as they walked away. The little girl looked back at him, her earlier smile replaced by a look of sadness and disappointment, and was that fear? As they got further away, Rick overheard the man say, "Your new home is waiting for you. We need to hurry." "Will Mum be there?" the girl asked. Of course," the man replied. The girl glanced back one last time, and this time Rick was certain. The look in her eyes was unmistakably one of fear. Something was very, very wrong here. And Rick Dawson, retired military officer, grandfather, and now reluctant vigilante, knew he couldn't just walk away. His heart raced as he watched the man and the girl disappear into the sea of parked cars. The uneasy feeling in his gut had transformed into a full-blown alarm. Years of military training kicked in, and he knew he had to act. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As the line connected, he took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. The dispatcher's voice came through, calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? Rick spoke quickly but clearly, his military training evident in his precise communication. This is Rick Dawson. I'm at the Walmart Supercenter on San Bernardo Avenue in Laredo. There's a man with a little girl. She doesn't look like she's his daughter, and she seems scared. I think he might be trying to take her somewhere against her will. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Sir, can you describe the man and the girl? Rick quickly relayed the details. The man's apparent Hispanic background, the girl's blonde hair and Hello Kitty shirt, the suspicious behavior he'd witnessed inside the store and in the parking lot. All right, Mr. Dawson, the dispatcher said after taking down all the information. We're sending officers to your location now. Can you stay where you are, and please don't approach the man or the girl. Wait for the officers to arrive. I understand, Rick replied. I'm a veteran. I'll be waiting outside the Walmart entrance. I'm wearing a veteran's cap. Noted, Mr. Dawson. The officers will see you there, said the dispatcher. As he ended the call, Rick's mind raced. He knew he should wait for the police, but every second felt crucial. What if the man managed to leave before the officers arrived? What if he really was planning to take the girl somewhere she didn't want to go? Torn between his instinct to act and the dispatcher's instructions, Rick made a decision. He needed to at least make sure Margaret was okay and give her the medicine she desperately needed. He hurried to their car, his eyes scanning the parking lot for any sign of the man and the girl, but he couldn't find them. When he reached the vehicle, he tapped on Margaret's window, startling her slightly. Rick, she said as she rolled down the window, her face etched with concern. What's going on? What took you so long? He handed her the medicine and the figurine toy. I'm sorry, dear, something's happened. I need you to take your medicine now and keep this figurine toy in the car. I've called the police. They're on their way. Margaret's eyes widened. The police? Rick, are you in danger? No, he assured her quickly. But I think I've witnessed something suspicious. I need to go back and wait for the officers. Will you be okay here? Margaret nodded, her face pale but determined. Of course, but Rick, please be careful. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. I will. Lock the doors, okay? I'll be back as soon as I can. With a heavy heart, Rick turned and walked back towards the Walmart entrance. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He'd spent his life serving and protecting, and even now, in his retirement, it seemed that duty still called. As he positioned himself near the sliding doors, his eyes constantly scanned the parking lot. He prayed the officers would arrive soon, and that he hadn't made a terrible mistake. But deep down, he knew. His instincts had rarely led him astray, and right now they were screaming that a little girl was in danger. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slowly. Rick's mind raced with possibilities. What if he was wrong? What if this was just a misunderstanding? But then he remembered the fear in the girl's eyes, the man's aggressive behavior, the mention of a new home. No, he couldn't ignore this. He had to trust his gut. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw a police cruiser pull into the parking lot, its lights flashing but sirens silent. As two officers stepped out, Rick straightened his back, adjusted his veteran's cap, and prepared to tell his story once again. He only hoped it wasn't too late. The two officers approached Rick, their faces a mix of curiosity and professional detachment. The older of the two, a stocky man with graying hair at his temples, spoke first. "Are you the gentleman who called about a possible kidnapping?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Rick nodded, standing at attention out of habit. "Yes, sir. Rick Dawson, retired military." The younger officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, pulled out a notepad. "Can you tell us exactly what you saw, Mr. Dawson?" Rick took a deep breath and recounted the events of the past hour, the encounter in the toy aisle, the man's aggressive behavior, the girl's apparent fear, and the suspicious comments about a new home. As he spoke, he could see the officers exchanging glances, their expressions unreadable. When he finished, the older officer sighed. "Mr. Dawson, I understand your concern, but did you actually see this man hurt the girl? Did she ask you for help?" Rick felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Well, no, but—" The female officer cut him off. "Sir, I'm afraid we can't just go searching for a man and his daughter based on a feeling. There are no current missing person reports matching the girl's description, and without concrete evidence of a crime." "But you don't understand," Rick protested, his frustration mounting. "I know what I saw. That girl was scared. And that man—" "Mr. Dawson," the older officer interrupted, his tone firmer now. "I appreciate your concern and your service to our country. But we can't act on hunches. If you see them again and witness any actual crime, please don't hesitate to call us. But for now, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do." Rick stood there, stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could they just dismiss his concerns like this? I think you just can't leave without at least searching the parking lot. They could still be here." The female officer's voice softened slightly. "Sir, with all due respect, have you considered that maybe this is related to your military experience? PTSD can sometimes cause—" "This has nothing to do with PTSD," Rick snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. "I know what I saw. That girl is in danger, and if you won't do anything about it, then—" "Then what, Mr. Dawson?" the older officer asked, his voice taking on a warning tone. "I hope you're not planning on taking matters into your own hands. That would be a very bad idea." Rick fell silent, realizing he'd said too much. The officers exchanged another look before the older one spoke again. "We're going to let you off with a warning this time, Mr. Dawson. But please don't call in false reports. Next time there could be consequences. Do you understand?" Defeated, Rick nodded but quickly looked away in frustration. "Yes, I understand." As the officers turned to leave, Rick noticed the crowd that had gathered. Customers and staff alike were staring, some whispering to each other, others shaking their heads disapprovingly. He felt exposed, foolish, like he'd made a spectacle of himself for nothing. But as he watched the police cruiser drive away, that nagging feeling in his gut remained. He couldn't shake the image of the little girl's frightened face, couldn't unhear the man's words about a new home. With a heavy heart, Rick turned and began walking back to his car. He'd have to face Margaret, explain why he'd called the police, why he'd made such a fuss. But even as embarrassment and doubt crept in, a part of him remained certain. Something was wrong, and if the police wouldn't help, maybe it was up to him to do something about it. As he reached his car, Rick paused, his hand on the door handle. He took one last look around the parking lot, hoping against hope to catch a glimpse of the girl and her supposed father. But they were long gone, lost in the sea of cars and shoppers going about their day, oblivious to the potential tragedy unfolding in their midst. With a sigh, Rick opened the car door, preparing himself for the conversation ahead with Margaret. He didn't know what his next move would be, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just let this go, not when a child's safety was at stake. Whatever came next, Rick Dawson was prepared to face it head-on, just as he had faced every challenge in his long and eventful life. As Rick slid into the driver's seat, Margaret turned to him, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. The air conditioning in the car had been running, creating a cool oasis amidst the oppressive Texas heat, but it did little to ease the tension Rick felt. "Rick, what on earth is going on?" Margaret asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I saw you talking to the police from the rear window. Is everything all right?" Rick took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. How could he explain this without sounding like he'd lost his mind? "Margaret, do you remember that little girl I mentioned earlier? The one I saw in the store?" he began, his voice low and serious. Margaret nodded, her brow furrowing. "Yes, the one you bought this toy for. What about her?" "Well, I think she might be in danger," Rick said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The man she was with, I don't think he's really her father. Something about the whole situation just felt wrong." He went on to explain everything he'd observed: the man's suspicious behavior, the girl's fear, the comments about a new home. As he spoke, he could see Margaret's expression changing from confusion to concern. "Oh, Rick," she said when he'd finished, "that does sound awful, but the police, they didn't believe you." Rick shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "No, they said they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. They even suggested it might be my PTSD acting up. PTSD, my foot." Margaret reached out and took his hand, her touch comforting despite the lingering pain in her joints. "But you don't think it is, do you? You really believe this girl is in danger?" "I know it sounds crazy," Rick admitted. "But yes, I do. I can't explain it, Margaret. But I just know something's not right, and I can't just sit here and do nothing." Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Then, to Rick's surprise, she nodded. "I believe you, Rick. You've always had good instincts, and if you think this girl needs help, then we need to do something." Relief washed over Rick. He squeezed Margaret's hand, grateful for her support. "Thank you, dear. But what can we do? The police won't help, and we have no idea where they've gone." As if in answer to his question, a car suddenly drove past them, heading towards the exit of the parking lot. Rick's eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of a familiar blonde head in the passenger seat. "That's her," he exclaimed, sitting up straight. "That's the girl." Without hesitation, Rick started the car. "Margaret, I know this is crazy, but I think we need to follow them, just to make sure she's safe. Are you okay with that?" Margaret nodded, her face set with determination. "The medication's working, I'm feeling better. And you're right, we need to make sure that child is safe. If we at least see them stop at a house or see a mother, then we'd know she's safe, and maybe this is just a misunderstanding. So yes, let's go." With a surge of adrenaline, Rick pulled out of the parking space and began to follow the other car. As they drove, he couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. Here he was, a retired military officer in his late 60s, embarking on what felt like a covert operation with his arthritic wife as his partner. They followed the car for several minutes, staying a safe distance behind to avoid detection. Rick's military training kicked in, helping him maintain a discreet tail while keeping the target in sight. The streets of Laredo passed by in a blur, the familiar landmarks taking on a sinister quality in light of their impromptu mission. Suddenly, the car ahead turned into a remote gas station near the Mexican border. Rick's heart rate spiked. They were only about 5 minutes from the Walmart, but this area felt worlds away from the busy shopping center they'd left behind. The gas station stood alone, surrounded by scrubland, with the border fence visible in the distance. Rick pulled into the gas station but kept his distance, parking on the far side of the lot. From here they had a clear view of the other car. The air was thick with tension as they watched the scene unfold. They saw the man get out of the car, his movements quick and furtive. He opened the trunk, leaving it open, then headed into the gas station store, leaving the girl alone in the vehicle. The whole sequence of events set off alarm bells in Rick's mind. "This doesn't look good," Rick murmured, his suspicions growing stronger by the second. Margaret squeezed his arm. "What are you going to do?" Rick took a deep breath, his mind racing through possible scenarios. "I'm going to check on the girl. You stay here, okay? Lock the doors." Margaret nodded, worry etched on her face. "Be careful, Rick. Please." With a reassuring smile, Rick stepped out of the car. The heat hit him like an endless wave, but he barely noticed it. His focus was entirely on the car across the lot and the little girl inside it. As he approached the vehicle, his heart pounded in his chest. He knew he was taking a risk, but the thought of that little girl in danger spurred him on. When he reached the car, he peered through the window, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The girl was slumped in the passenger seat, apparently unconscious. Her blonde hair fell across her face, and her Hello Kitty shirt was rumpled. She looked small and vulnerable, and Rick felt a surge of protective anger. Then he peered through the window on the front seat and saw a bottle of syrup medicine, its label barely visible, resting on the console. In that moment, all of Rick's doubts vanished. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an overreaction. This was a real, tangible threat to a child's safety. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911 once again. As he waited for the dispatcher to answer, he kept his eyes fixed on the store entrance, praying the man wouldn't return before help arrived. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the call connected. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. Rick spoke quickly but clearly, years of military communication training kicking in. "This is Rick Dawson. I'm at the gas station near the Mexican border, about 5 minutes from the Walmart on San Bernardo Avenue. There's an unconscious girl locked in a car here. I believe she's been kidnapped. Please send help immediately." "Sir, are you certain the girl is unconscious?" the dispatcher asked, her tone serious. "Yes, I can see her through the window. She's not moving," Rick confirmed, his eyes never leaving the store entrance. "All right, Mr. Dawson. We're dispatching units to your location now. They should be there in a few minutes. Please do not approach the vehicle or attempt to intervene. Can you stay on the line with me?" Rick was about to agree when he saw movement at the store entrance. His heart nearly stopped. "The man is coming out of the store. I have to go." Despite the dispatcher's protests, Rick ended the call and quickly moved away from the car, turning his back and trying to appear casual. He watched in the rearview mirror of a nearby car as the man exited the store, his arms loaded with supplies that made Rick's stomach churn. Duct tape, wet wipes, and what looked like a prepaid phone. In that moment, Rick knew he couldn't wait for the police. Every second counted. He had to act now before the man got into the car and disappeared. With a burst of speed that belied his age, Rick sprinted towards the man's car, positioning himself between the vehicle and its owner. The man stopped short, surprise and anger flashing across his face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the man snarled, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You again? I told you to mind your own business, old man." Rick stood his ground, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I can't let you take that girl. The police are on their way. It's over." The man's face contorted with rage. "Get out of my way, or I swear I'll make you regret it. This is your last warning, stalker. Move, or you'll get hurt." Rick's military training kicked in, his body tensing for a fight. "If you want to get to that girl, you'll have to go through me, and let me tell you, just hurting me won't be enough. You'll have to kill me right here, right now, on this very spot if you want to get past me." For a moment, the two men stood there, locked in a tense standoff. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, the heat shimmering off the pavement. In the distance, a car horn honked, a reminder of the normal world continuing on, oblivious to the drama unfolding in this dusty gas station lot. Just then, the welcome sound of police sirens filled the air. The man's head snapped up, panic replacing anger in his eyes. In a desperate move, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a flip knife, the blade glinting in the harsh sunlight. "Last chance, old man," he growled, brandishing the knife. "Move, or I'll cut you down." But Rick stood firm, his military training taking over completely. As the man lunged forward with the knife, Rick's body moved on instinct. He sidestepped the attack, grabbed the man's wrist, and in one fluid motion twisted it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground and Rick kicked it away, sending it skittering across the pavement. The man howled in pain and fury, trying to wrench his arm free, but Rick's grip was like iron. Just then, a police car screeched into the gas station, 2 officers leaping out with weapons drawn. "Police, freeze!" one of them shouted. The fight went out of the man instantly. He sagged in Rick's grip, defeat written all over his face. As the officers approached, Rick finally allowed himself to relax slightly. He'd done it. He'd stopped the kidnapper, the girl was safe. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what he'd just done began to sink in. He, Rick Dawson, a 60-something-year-old retired military officer, had just single-handedly thwarted a kidnapping attempt. As one of the officers began to handcuff the man, the other approached Rick. "Sir, are you all right? That was quite something." Rick nodded, suddenly feeling every one of his years. "I'm fine, but the girl, she's in the car. I think she's unconscious." The officer nodded gravely and turned to his partner. "Johnson, search the suspect. I'll check on the girl." Officer Johnson patted down the handcuffed man, retrieving a set of car keys and a wallet from his pockets. He tossed the keys to his partner, who caught them deftly. "Let's see what we've got here," Johnson muttered, opening the wallet. His eyes widened as he flipped through its contents. Multiple IDs. This guy's got at least 3 different names in here. Meanwhile, the other officer had rushed to the car. Using the keys, he unlocked the door and leaned in to check on the girl. "She's breathing but unresponsive," he called out. "We need medical assistance now." Johnson immediately radioed for backup and paramedics, his voice urgent as he relayed their location and the situation. The officer by the car gently lifted the unconscious girl out, cradling her small form carefully as he laid her on the ground in the recovery position. Rick watched, his heart in his throat, as the officer checked her vital signs again. "Pulse is steady but weak," the officer reported. "Breathing is shallow, possible drug-induced unconsciousness." It felt like an eternity, but in reality, it was only a few minutes before the wail of sirens announced the arrival of backup and medical assistance. 2 more police cars and an ambulance pulled into the gas station, their lights painting the scene in flashes of red and blue. Paramedics rushed to the girl's side, quickly taking over from the officer. They worked efficiently, checking her vitals, setting up an IV, and preparing her for transport. The gas station, once a quiet pit stop on the outskirts of town, had transformed into a hive of activity. As the new officers secured the scene and the detective arrived to take charge, Rick found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. But through it all, one thought kept running through his mind. He'd made a difference. He'd saved a life. And as he watched the paramedics gently lift the still unconscious girl onto a stretcher, he knew that no matter what happened next, he'd done the right thing. Sometimes being a hero wasn't about grand gestures or epic battles. Sometimes it was about trusting your instincts and having the courage to act when others wouldn't. Rick stood to the side, watching, as the paramedics tended to the still unconscious girl on a gurney. His heart ached for her, wondering what horrors she had endured and what trauma she might carry with her, even after this ordeal was over. One of the officers, a seasoned detective by the looks of him, approached Rick. "Mr. Dawson, I'm Detective Martinez. I'd like to get your statement if you're up for it." Rick nodded, his military bearing returning as he faced the detective. "Of course, sir. Whatever I can do to help." As Rick recounted the events of the day, from his first encounter with the girl at Walmart to the confrontation at the gas station, he could see the detective's expression change from skepticism to grudging respect. "That's quite a story, Mr. Dawson," Detective Martinez said when Rick had finished. "And I have to say your instincts were spot on. We found multiple IDs in the suspect's wallet. Juan Ramirez, Miguel Sanchez, Carlos Ortiz. We're not sure which, if any, is his real name." Rick's brow furrowed. "Multiple IDs? So he was planning to take her across the border. The detective nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. We also found cough medicine in the car, probably what he used to drug her. The duct tape, wet wipes, prepaid phone, classic tools for human trafficking. A chill ran down Rick's spine at the detective's words. The reality of what he had prevented hit him in full force. Just then, a commotion near the gurney caught their attention. The girl was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. "Excuse me," Rick said to the detective, already moving towards the gurney. He approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten the girl. As he drew near, he could hear her confused, groggy voice. Where am I? Where's Miguel?" The paramedic was speaking to her softly, trying to keep her calm. Rick hung back, not wanting to intrude, but unable to leave. He watched as the girl's eyes darted around, taking in her surroundings with growing panic. Then her gaze landed on Rick. For a moment she stared at him, confusion evident on her face. Then recognition dawned. You're the man from the store," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "The one who wanted to give me the toy." Rick nodded, stepping closer. "That's right, my name is Rick. Can you tell me your name?" "Chloe," she replied. "Chloe Parker. I'm 6 years old." Rick smiled gently. "It's nice to meet you, Chloe. You're safe now. Can you tell me what happened?" The police officers gathered around her. Chloe's lower lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. "Miguel, I was walking out of school when the day ended. He was there and he came up to me. He said he was a friend of Mom and Dad. He said they had a surprise for me, a new house. When I told him I was so hungry and thirsty because my water bottle ran out, we even went to Walmart. And when I asked if we could buy something for my new room, a toy or something, he agreed." She continued, "But at the toy section he changed his mind." She paused, her brow furrowing. "But then, when I got back in the car and had a drink, I don't remember. I got sleepy." Rick asked softly, "Chloe, do your parents really have a new house?" Chloe shook her head, looking confused. "I don't know, maybe." Rick heard her car door opening and closing, the familiar sound drawing his attention. He glanced at Margaret and came to her as soon as he noticed her, telling her that she should stay inside and not move too much because of her joint. But Margaret reassured him that she was fine. She'd sat in the car long enough that she feared she'd bore a hole in the seat. She wanted to know what was going on and was eager to meet the girl too. He walked her to Chloe's side and introduced her to his wife. "This is my wife, Margaret," Rick said, watching as his wife's nurturing instincts immediately kicked in. "Hi, Mrs. Margaret," Chloe greeted her shyly, her voice small but polite. Margaret knelt down beside Chloe, her eyes filled with concern. She spoke softly, her gentle voice seeming to have an immediate calming effect on the girl. "Oh, the poor dear," she murmured, taking in the scene with a mixture of sympathy and care. As they waited, a car sped into the gas station, followed closely by a police escort. A man and woman leapt out, their faces etched with worry and relief. Behind them, a distinguished-looking man in a suit emerged from another car. "Mom, Dad!" Chloe cried out, trying to sit up on the gurney. The couple rushed to their daughter, enveloping her in a tight embrace. The man in the suit approached more slowly, introducing himself as the school principal. As the family reunited, Margaret nudged Rick gently. She opened her purse and took out the figurine toy that Rick had bought earlier. "I think now might be a good time for this," she whispered. Rick nodded, taking the toy. He approached the gurney where Chloe was now sitting up, surrounded by her parents. "Chloe," he said softly, "I bought this for you earlier. I'd like you to have it if that's okay." Chloe's face lit up as she took the figurine, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but sincere. Chloe's mother looked at Rick, her eyes brimming with tears. "You saved our daughter. How can we ever thank you?" Rick shook his head. "No thanks necessary, ma'am. I'm just glad Chloe is safe." The father reached into his wallet, but Rick held up a hand. "Please, sir, I'd like it if you'd accept the toy as a gift. Chloe reminded me of my granddaughter, and I just wanted to do something kind for her." Chloe hugged the toy tighter, then looked up at Rick. "Can I put it on my backpack?" she asked. "Of course," Rick smiled. One of the officers brought over Chloe's backpack, which they had found in the kidnapper's car. Chloe carefully attached the figurine to her bag. "This way I'll always remember you," she said to Rick, a small smile on her face. As the family talked with the officers and paramedics, Chloe's father approached Rick again. "We'd like to thank you properly," he said, holding out a business card. "Please take my number. We owe you so much." Rick accepted the card, touched by the gesture. Detective Martinez then approached, informing everyone that they would need to come to the station to give formal statements and sort things out. As the scene began to wind down, Rick and Margaret made their way back to their car. The Texas sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Are you okay to go to the station?" Rick asked Margaret as they got into the car. "I can drop you at home first if you're tired." Margaret shook her head firmly. "Not a chance. I'm coming with you. I'm so proud of you, Rick. After all these years, you're still as strong and brave as ever." Rick smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "And you're always my best partner post-military." He kissed her hand gently. "You know, Margaret, I didn't expect it either. When that man pulled the knife, it was like muscle memory took over." As they drove towards the police station, Rick reflected on the day's events. He may be retired, but it seemed his days of serving and protecting were far from over. And as he glanced at Margaret, her presence a constant comfort by his side. "You know, Margaret," Rick began, his voice thoughtful, "today made me realize something." Margaret turned to him, her eyes soft in the dim light of the car. "What's that, dear?" "All those years I spent in the military, I thought that was the only way I could serve my country. But today showed me that service doesn't end when you hang up the uniform." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I may not be on a battlefield anymore, but there are still battles to be fought right here at home. Battles for the safety of our children, for the well-being of our communities." Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "You've always been a hero to me, Rick, but today you were a hero to that little girl and her family too." Rick nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "You know, in some ways this feels even more meaningful than my military service. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of my time in the forces. But today, I saw the immediate impact of my actions. I saw the relief on those parents' faces, the gratitude in Chloe's eyes." He chuckled softly. "I guess you're never too old to learn new things. Today taught me that being an everyday hero, right here in our own backyard, can be just as important as any military mission." Margaret smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Well, one thing's for sure. We certainly have a story to tell at the next veteran gathering. I can just imagine the looks on their faces when you tell them about your Walmart adventure." Rick laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "You're right about that. Who would have thought a simple trip for groceries could turn into all this?" As they pulled into the police station parking lot, Rick turned to Margaret, his expression serious but hopeful. "You know, I think I've found a new mission in life. We may be retired, but there's still so much we can do to make a difference in our community." Margaret nodded, her face glowing with pride and love. "I couldn't agree more, dear. And whatever you decide to do next, I'll be right there beside you." With a heart full of gratitude and hope, Rick stepped into the station, ready to embrace this new chapter of his life. The everyday hero in him had been awakened, and he was eager to see where this new mission would lead.